So here's another example. We want to find the inverse of this function, rational function, f of x equals x plus 1 over 3 minus x, and the domain and range of each of those, of the function and of the inverse, which will also be a function. And you can check the graph of this, but it is 1 to 1. So the inverse is going to be a function as well. So first of all, we set y equal to that, and then we switch x's and y's, and we want to solve for y. So the first thing to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by 3 minus y, and that gets rid of this denominator. So you notice that these two will cancel with each other, these 3 minus y times the right side, and we have 3 minus y times the left side. So let's expand that now, distribute the x through the parentheses to get 3x minus xy equals y plus 1. And what are we solving for now? We're solving for y, remember? So we should group the y's together. Group the y's together. So in other words, I'm going to move this y over here and move this x onto this side. So if we do that, what do we get? Well, we get negative y, negative xy equals 1 minus 3x. And then we have all the y's together, so I'm going to factor out a y. So if we factor out a y, we get y times negative 1 minus x equals 1 minus 3x. And finally, we're going to divide by negative 1, negative x on both sides. We divide by negative 1, negative x. These two cancel. And so we end up with y equals 1 minus 3x over negative 1 minus x. So that's my inverse function here. So here's my function, x plus 1 over 3 minus x, and my inverse, 1 minus 3x over negative 1 minus x. So that's the first part. The second part is, let's find the domain and ranges of these two functions. Okay, so I've written the functions here, the x plus 1 over 3 minus x, that's my original function. We found the inverse to be 1 minus 3x over minus 1 minus x. Now, we're going to find the domain and range of each of these functions. But note here that I have an equal sign because we can actually write this in a different way. Sometimes people do that, depending on the approach you take in your algebra. It may look slightly different. So if I multiply top and bottom by negative 1, so that's not changing the function. If I multiply the top by negative 1, in other words, I'm going to flip this to be 3x minus 1. If I multiply the bottom by negative 1, both of these turn positive, so we end up with x plus 1. I just reverse the order here to put the x first. That's the same inverse function of this one here. So this is another form of the inverse. It's just all I did was change how it looked to get rid of a lot of the negatives. And you can do that. That's your prerogative, to leave it like this or to change it to this. Okay, so now let's look at the domain of these functions. Well, I know the domain of my original functions. I can't divide by 0, so I can't have x can't be 3. And I'm going to write it like this. X can't be 3. What about the range of my function? Well, I don't know what the range is so easily. It's not so easy to find the range of a rational function. We'll see that as we move along, but I'm not sure right now. But I do know the range of this function is the domain of my inverse function. What is the domain of my inverse function? That's kind of easy to see. If you look at that inverse function, x can't be negative 1 because I can't divide by 0. So this domain of this inverse function, x can't be negative 1, which means my range of my original function is y can't be negative 1 either. So y can't be negative 1. So the range of my original function is y is not equal to negative 1. Now what about the range of my inverse function? Well, that comes from the domain of my function. My function's domain was x can't be 3, so my inverse function's domain is what? Oh, my inverse function's range is y can't be 3. So notice the switch here between domain and range between the two functions. So the key to the inverse is, first of all, you have to switch x's and y's and then solve for y, and then the domain and ranges will switch as well. This idea is very useful when you're going to trigonometry. So it's very important to understand the concept of inverse, an inverse function.